This is the Friday, March 13th, 2015 version of the Market Plus segment. Joining us now is Sue Martin. Sue, welcome back.
Thank you, Mike.
We've got a lot of questions from our viewers on Facebook and Twitter, and most of them are corn and bean questions. So I want to just kind of jump right into that. We've got a question from Matt in Anamosa, and he's curious, will we see 420 on the new crop corn?
I think there's very possibility you can. That isn't like asking the moon. You know, one thing we have recommended to producers that are looking at trying to make sales and concerned yet because it looks like we're going to have a warm, possibly dry summer, is that if you are going to make sales, even though we think 2016 will be better than this year, if you are going to make sales, then maybe look at buying a call spread. 440 has been the high on the December corn, so buy the 440 call. And then 523 was last year's high on December contract. So $5 is going to be psychological. Maybe you sell a $5 call. Now you should be able to get that done for under 11 cents or at 11 or under, especially with the markets breaking down a little bit here. And that would then give you the peace of mind to be able to go ahead and make your sales, and yet you've got yourself protected.
And have a level of protection in there just in case.
I think we're going to get a summer rally, a nice, vibrant summer spike. It depends. You know, if you have a good spring, that old adage, farmers love to plant corn, does kind of make you wonder, you know.
And then that's kind of the flip side of that would be just in the upper Midwest. So we're in Iowa taping this, of course, and there's been a lot of talk just in the last week of how much this reminds people of 2012. Just being able to have everything dry, and there's no rain in our forecast. And that leads us right into the question from Jeff here in Iowa. He's curious about the chatter about the drought. So we've got a little bit in South Dakota, parts of Minnesota, and Oklahoma. Is that concern showing itself in the market? You mentioned wheat maybe benefiting from the dryness. Do we see that moving into the corn or bean side of the...
I think we will. At first, I think it'll have a negative impact because the planting goes easy. The old saying, plant your corn in the dust and your beans will bust, you know. I think so we'll have that. And then as we get into, like, say, late May, possibly early June, and we're still dry, not catching much in the rains, because, you know, the Dakotas, North Dakota is thought that they'll get in early. They may be a little cooler this spring, but it's thought they will get in earlier this year, which is good for them. And South Dakota is very dry. Almost all of Minnesota is dry. Part of Wisconsin, a little bit of Nebraska, even though I think almost a southwestern third of Iowa is getting quite dry. So there is some dryness out here, and it seems more enhanced the western corn belt as opposed to the eastern corn belt. Eastern corn belt's to be warm this summer too, but they'll catch more rain, I think, than the west does. Does that impact us? I think it does give us a chance for a summer rally, a real quick one. I think it could be here and gone tomorrow, you know, that type of thing, very quick, vibrant, like a spike on an EKG or something, and then it's probably gone, and then we drift on down into a normal fall low, and then we start looking at next year's. These are 30-year cycles, too, that are calling for lows here and to be done, and I think we've seen that. I think we're limited as to how deep corn really cuts.
Okay. Now, one of the things you talked about was the potential for dryness here in the Corn Belt. You mentioned we do have an El Nino situation. They officially announced El Nino a week or two ago, and that's going to push that moisture more east rather than towards the western Corn Belt. Is that?
Well, also in the south, the Delta, unfortunately, that'll mean more beans, and through the southern part of the plains, or the Midwest, I should say. And if you notice, I think that we do kind of have maybe the forecast for April is supposed to be that you could have a little wetness in those areas, and then they come back with a nice May as well. Well, if that's the case, yes, you get it planted, but it also makes you wonder what happens then if you turn back to a hot, dry summer. All of a sudden, you could have that area really sucking wind on their corn. And the one thing we got to keep in mind is you've got all the major producing countries. You know, Brazil dropped what? 10%. You've got Argentina down sharply in production. You've got the Ukraine where the hryvnia is only 4 cents on the dollar. those farmers are not going to be able to afford to pay the money for the high input costs. So their production's going to go down 25, 30%. You've got Russia going backwards, and with the crude dropping as well, and then their currency in the floor too. And now, on top of all of them, I think the 5th largest exporter is South Africa, and they're mired in drought. And so they're not going to be exporting, they're going to be importing. So, if the U.S. comes off with less than a stellar crop, I mean, let's face it, you could take the production down to trendline yields, 162, and maybe depending on how many acres you lose, if we were to lose, say, up to 2 million acres, right now the USDA's got us down 1.6, I think. Okay, all of a sudden your carryout's going backwards big time again.
Yeah, even with the what we're rolling in, even with this year's carryout, we're still down just to slightly over 1 billion bushels, 1.214 if I remember.
I think 1.7.
1.7. Okay, so it's down substantially from this last year.
Yeah, they were talking 2 billion something, and then we started moving backwards again.
You bet. Now, on the flip side of that, we've heard some of the planting intentions report, of course, comes out March 31, but there have been some independent analysts that have come out and said bean acres going to be considerably higher this year. Do you find yourself in that camp? Do you think we are going to see more beans than maybe the USDA is anticipating?
I think so. I think that it's real interesting because remember, in the February report, I believe it was, it showed that we had about 1.5 million less acres of wheat planted. Now, what's going to go into that? Well, I suspect those acres are going to fight with sorghum because the basis levels have been phenomenal, and that's Chinese driven. So that may go to sorghum, so maybe that's acres that you don't come back with for beans. That's possible. But then you look at all these marginal acres, and I can't believe putting the expensive corn seed into the ground and fertilizer in those areas. I think that might be beans that those go into. So I can certainly see where we could see more bean acres. Maybe we don't see quite as high, but I certainly don't think we're backwards like the government says. But I thought it was real interesting that they did go backwards, even ever so little, 200,000 acres. I thought that was really interesting because it makes you wonder what will that, well, first off, this report here at the end of March, I think they'll show another indication like that again.
Okay. Now, that being said, John and Jessup's question is, do beans have a rally in them back over $10?
Well, I think you could do that. This market is coming down, but it's kind of like, it's not a typical bean market that'll just wash out. And I think part of it is that we have to keep one thing in mind, that for maybe this year, yes, if you get a little bit of a weather issue or a stevedore strike, depending on how cheap you get first, you could swing that market back up to $10. But have you noticed how right under 10, or right at 10, we're having a little bit of issue, and that's becoming psychological. I think if you were to put some weather in with it, yeah, you might be able to vibrate the market enough to do something like that. But you've got, okay, the fear of losing some domestic demand. Maybe the export market picks it up to kind of compensate. Won't be quite like last year because last year we had very good export demand for soy meal because of Argentina's issues, but also we had good demand domestically. Maybe our domestic demand all of a sudden wanes a little bit, but then we have the pickup, so we just are status quo. That isn't quite the same thing to give us that big, vibrant push. Soybean oil. I could see where soybean oil is going to become more important as time goes on. But the key is the beans from last year didn't have as good a quality of oil content because of the cool days and cool nights. And, the one thing that nobody seems to really be focusing on, and this might be a little more longer term, another year or so, but India is a country that's really going to come on strong. It's estimated by 2030 that India's population will exceed China's. That's 1.5 billion people. That's a lot of people. India's economy is expected, or their growth is expected to hold very stable as we go through 2025. China's is not. China's is forecast to drop as much as down to 3.9%. in those 2025.
Yeah.
So India is a country that uses a lot of veg oil. And they are kind of researching GMOs. And in fact, they've managed to increase off of some research on the mustard seed, which is an oil seed, production by 30%. India's a country I think we've got to keep our eye on because that could be another huge market that's opening up.
All right, well, we'll keep our eyes on that as we go forward. And thank you so much for joining us on this Friday the 13th, Sue.
Yeah.
And thanks to all of you for sending in your questions via Facebook and Twitter. Please continue to do so and remind all your friends to tune in. Thanks for watching and have a great week.